I'm John Kane, and I welcome you to Let's Talk Native on this Tuesday, March 31st, 2020, the longest month in the history of the world. I don't know if there's been a longer month than March of 2020. While this program may not provide a path to spiritual enlightenment, we do encourage and in some cases start conversations. We kind of break the rules here for Native Radio. We don't do prayers. We don't do buffalo speeches. We don't speak about mysticism. We take a tough look at history, oppression, and survival. We talk about culture, the arts, politics, and identity, and we may step on a few toes along the way. But our real goal here is to bring people together by breaking down what separates us. We will take on the false narratives and provide critical thinking to all that's heaped upon us, and we do it all right here, live from the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. So let's talk Native. But first, let me remind people that our audio streams live on our website, which is www.letstalknative.com. I encourage you to check out our website, check out our store page on there where you can buy some T-shirts to promote Let's Talk Native, or we'll provide conversation piece because they kind of make a statement. But anyway, we take the video and we stream that on live, Facebook Live, and on our group pages, on our Facebook group pages, and across a bunch of other Facebook group pages as well. We take the audio and we put it up on SoundCloud, so it puts it up as a podcast on all your favorite podcast platforms. We take the video and we put it up on our YouTube channel, which is Let's Talk Native TV. I encourage you to subscribe to our podcast casts, and I encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm the show's host and producer, and I'm joined in studio by Jake Proud, who's managing our audio and our video. Look, I got a couple things I want to get into. One of the things that I've suggested in some of the promo here, racism seems to be surviving this COVID-19 just fine. So I want to talk a little bit about that, where it's showing itself, how we are responding to it, I guess. And just, at a time when people think that, when there's crisis, people just come together and it's so heartwarming. No, it doesn't quite like that. I mean, obviously it's not even happening politically in the U.S., and you still have the right versus the left, and that's true on the Canadian side and the U.S. side. But racism is doing quite well in the age of COVID-19. But let me talk about some of the numbers first. Since this whole thing started, I've been trying to give some of that. So let me change my page here. All right. So every day seems to be a record-breaking day, not just for the U.S., but for the world. The United States logged in almost 25,000 new cases today. They passed China, France, Iran, for Germany. They passed a bunch. They passed a bunch of nations for the total number of cases. Only Italy and Spain have more cases than the United States. I'm sorry, more deaths than the United States. Nobody has more cases than the United States. The United States is almost 2-1 over any other nation. So while the president is on television saying how wonderful the United States is doing, keep in mind, China has 5 times the population of the United States. And the United States has over double the number of cases, at least that China's reported. And actually they have more deaths as well. So I don't know what you compare the success of the United States against. I don't know what country you compare it to. I mean, Italy. I mean, at this point, the United States has the only thing they don't lead Italy in is the number of deaths. Well, I take it back. Italy had had a higher number of deaths, daily deaths today too. But I will say I think their new cases dropped down somewhat. But the United States had almost 25,000 new cases today. Italy had 4,000. Spain, which is starting to look like is starting to look a lot like Italy, had almost 8,000 new cases. So I just wanted to put those numbers in perspective. Now, one of the things that's also starting to you hear from the administration and from some of the folks, the agencies involved with this administration. They keep trying to say the mortality rate is, it's probably about 1%, maybe less than 1%. To be clear, if you do the mortality rate based on confirmed cases, if you use the biggest number possible, which are the global numbers, which now is what 858,000 total cases. That's how many people throughout the world are confirmed to have the disease. Now, it's not saying that's all, that there aren't more than that, because there probably are significantly more than that. There's probably 10 times that. But in terms of confirmed cases, 858,000 confirmed cases in the world. And there's 42,000 deaths. If you do that math, that comes out to a mortality rate of about 5%. Now, if you went back a month or so, that mortality rate was just under 4%. And, and again, you had a lot of people saying, well, that 4% rate's not going to hold. It's not going to hold. It's not going to hold. Well, you're right. It didn't hold. It went up. In the U.S., the first numbers, and again, when there were barely any testing done, and to be clear, the United States has only tested about 0.3% of their population. I don't think they've tested 1 million people yet. If they have, it's right around 1 million out of 330 million. But in the beginning, the U.S. was coming in just over 1% on the mortality rate. But the more those numbers come in, the more they roll in, not just from New York, but other places as well, that mortality rate has now risen up to 2%. So the numbers are going up. They aren't going down. I mean, you would think if this thing's going to level off, the more numbers will come in, any anomalies will work out in the math. But here's one of the reasons that the United States is at 2% and the global numbers are coming in at 5% is because Europe's numbers seem like they're off the chart. I mean, Italy, 12% of those sick die. 12% mortality rate of those who are confirmed to have the disease. Spain, 9%. France and UK, 7%. Germany's the only one with a lower number than the United States, and they're coming in at 1%. Don't know why. Jake was suggesting perhaps they really are the master race. I don't know that I buy that. I don't think Jake does either. Let's not forget, Trump claims to be German when it's convenient. So anyway, that's what the real numbers are looking like. So anybody who thinks the numbers are coming down, are flattening out in terms of death rate, no, that's not happening. Of course, we all know the numbers are going to continue to rise in terms of number of cases, and nobody's suggesting they aren't going to rise. In fact, even Trump is suggesting that that the peak is probably a week to 14 days away. I would like to believe that. I'm not sure that the peak is in 14 days. I'm not sure that the peak isn't a month away still, because there are a lot of even major cities that have not started to see the big numbers. I mean, New York has, but really, New York is really the only big city that's been ravaged like this. I mean, Detroit's starting to get bad. We know Seattle and Washington got hit pretty good, but in terms of other large cities like Chicago and Philadelphia, Los Angeles, those numbers still aren't coming in yet. And again, the testing is down. So we don't know what these numbers are going to look like in a month. Is the curve going to flatten? I don't know. I will say this is the first day, as I've been watching the numbers, that Italy's new cases have gone down on a daily basis. Their new cases were, again, they had about 4,000 new cases today. That's a lower number than they've had all week. Now, is it going to spike back up? Is this just an anomaly in the number counting? Who knows? But we can hope, right? Look, I did make my sarcastic comment today about the fact that only Italy and Spain have more deaths associated with this disease than the United States, and I asked the question, and I'll explain why if I need to, I guess. So, can we still explain why we're so against Columbus Day? I mean, to make my point, Columbus. Regardless of those who think he was Jewish or whatever else, there's pretty good evidence that he was from an area that is now, it wasn't then, but is now considered Italy. Ironically, Amerigo Vespucci came from an area that is now known as Italy. The guy who sailed for Great Britain called him John Cabot. Well, Giovanni Caboto was his real name. Another Italian sailor. So Italy has played a role in a lot of this imperialism, and of course, nobody had a bigger role in colonization in this hemisphere than Spain. So there is an irony that this pandemic is affecting Italy and Spain in a big way. Not suggesting that the numbers are going to hold against the United States or Russia or India. They're probably not even going to hold against the United States. The United States surpassed their total numbers and will probably surpass their death totals too. But there's an irony in that. So I don't know. I've got some friends who are Italian that I need to reach out. I mean, I don't mean just American Italian, but from Italy. So I'm going to reach out. The film crew that we ran into over the Santa Maria this past summer. I'll have to check in with those guys and find out what they're hearing from home. So anyway, I just wanted to run some of those numbers, and because they are frightening. Look, even both the governor of New York and the president of the United States, have now, especially the president, has conceded that no, Easter time is not going to bring people back into church. If it does, they better hope there's a God, because it's that's another nightmare scenario. By Easter time, this thing probably will not even have peaked yet, and of course, the death totals for the United States are still holding at a level, that seems at least reasonably proportionate to the number of new cases. Where those death totals start to get big, or disproportionate, like Italy and Spain are seeing, is when the hospitals get overrun. That is just starting. So look, if you're scared, you better suck it up, because it's going to get worse before it gets better. And, right now, the hospitals have not been overrun. I mean, yeah, they're running low on a lot of supplies, but they're not being overrun in the way that Italy and Spain are experiencing. But it's going to happen. It's coming. And again, the sheer size and population of the United States make this impossible to wrap your arms around. And again, in spite of the moron in the White House trying to suggest that he's done such a wonderful job, there's no country that is experiencing outside of Italy and Spain, and nobody is experiencing the massive spread of this disease in the way the United States is, and including the two countries that are way, way bigger than the United States, at least from the records the numbers that they're putting out there. So I guess we'll see. I will say this: at 858,000 cases throughout the world, Europe represents a significant, more than half of that. More than half of that. And I mean, look, if you just put Italy, Spain, Germany, France, and the UK together, they almost match that. But then you add up some of these other countries like Switzerland and Belgium, Netherlands, Austria. I mean, you add all these other countries, you start to realize just how much of that 858,000 people are European. And mostly Western European. I mean, if you look at the geography, you realize the concentration of confirmed cases in Western Europe, considering the small landmass compared to the United States, compared to China, India, Russia. I mean, there's a lot of cases in a small area there, which when as a native person, I think about the plagues that came from Europe. It's ironic that this plague is having such a devastating effect to these European countries. It's amazing to me. It's amazing to me. So anyway, I want to put, as always, I want to put some of those numbers into perspective. And again, if you believe that the mortality rate is going to come down, then what you have to believe is that that there's going to be a massive swell in the number of cases that don't get serious. I mean, when I say that the United States has almost 4,000 deaths, they have more than that are still listed as serious or critical. So those numbers can go up. I mean, I mentioned Italy had, kind of turned the corner, at least for the day, on new cases, but they still had over 837 new deaths today. And they've still got a bunch of people who are, in hospitals that are being listed as serious or critical. So anyway, the subject that I wanted to talk about, and look, I know I talk a lot about racism, but you would think that at some point, some of that hostility would go away. Some of that, that discrimination, that prejudice, that overt racism would take a back seat to a global pandemic. I mean, this isn't just a once in a lifetime occurrence. This is once in a century. I mean, again, you got to go back to what is it? 1918, right? 1918 for the Spanish flu that started in Kansas. Just I want to say that. 1916 to 1918. 19, yeah. So yeah, you go 19. Yeah. So in that, again, before 1920, 1916 to 1918 was when the Spanish flu, which started in Kansas, wreaked havoc. And now there's this one. I mean, it's over 100 years. So this is a once in a century kind of occurrence. And you would think, I mean, because this is what everybody says, in a time of crisis, it's good to see people all coming together. Well, it ain't quite working out that way. It ain't working out that way in politics, and especially in an election year in the United States. And it's certainly not working out that way left and right in the U.S. or in Canada. And we're still seeing the racism. I mean, the Buffalo News, for instance, they actually wrote the editorial board of the Buffalo News, which is a newspaper that was recently sold off and is now laying off all of its people because of COVID-19. They were suggesting that the state needs to make the Senecas pay, make them pay. And of course, what they're talking about is the extortion that the state is trying to pull off against the Seneca Nation for revenue sharing of their gaming enterprise, which is closed down. But the Buffalo News saying, nope, now more than ever, the Seneca Nation needs to pay the state what they owe, what the arbitration panel say they have to pay, what the courts didn't say they had to pay, by the way. The arbitration panel did. But that's what the Buffalo News, so out of the blue, they pulled this out of thin air because in case anybody forgot that the state and the Senecas are at war, nope, the Buffalo News gotta stoke that fire. And they say now more than ever. Now, here's the thing. Now more than ever, the Senecas should be telling the state to go F off. Why? Because, again, the Buffalo News article said, they're holding $250 million away from the state. No, you're about half off. It's more like $500 million. To be clear, it's $500 million. And you know who needs that $500 million more than the state? The Seneca Nation. Their only means of public finance, their three casinos, are shut down. And I've said this on previous shows, but the only exclusive gaming happening in New York State is the state's lottery system. Yeah, they didn't suspend the lottery. No, they're still going to encourage people to go into a store to buy a lottery ticket because apparently that must be an essential service. So yeah, booze, lottery, and what else? Guns. Yeah. So booze, guns, and lottery tickets are still considered essential services in the time of a global pandemic. According to the federal government and according to New York State. Yeah, that's the priorities. So to see the Buffalo News kind of stoke this once again, it just kind of gives you, it shows you how the people around us really feel about us. And I just think it's worth mentioning. And if it were only the Buffalo News, that'd be great, but it's not. And look, Jake and I are working on a new video. We're going to talk about a lot about Canada, but tonight I'm not just talking about Canada, but I'm including them too. And including, when I say Canada, I mean Canadian citizens and U.S. citizens. We're starting to get some feedback, almost because of this COVID-19. This new stimulus bill that the U.S. passed, that Trump so proudly claims that he signed into law, like he made it happen. We had a few people say got into the details and are calling out the fact that some of that money is going to Indian Health Service. In fact, one woman posted, if you divide the amount of money that is included in this $2 trillion bill that's supposed to help defray, some of the impacts of this, of this COVID-19 epidemic. If you take that, I think she listed, and I don't know if it's true, because frankly I didn't pay that much attention to the bill. But she said there was like $3 billion going to native issues, I guess. And she said if you divide that by the number of actual native people, they're going to get more than the $1,200 that good old Americans are going to get. So I mean the racism again. I mean it's like it was unavoidable. I mean, and the fact of the matter is, Native people's lives have been complete. And I also, it's been so upended by U.S. policy that it's not even funny. I occasionally somebody will post something on Facebook that says something to the effect that if you want to see how failed socialism, just look at Native territories. As if socialism is what has driven the abject poverty that exists on Native territories? No, it wasn't. That's not socialism. That's like saying slavery was socialism because the plantation owners provided all of the necessities for slaves. That's not socialism. That's slavery. And if you cause the abject poverty and then you keep that poverty in place by your policies, that's not socialism. Socialism is where everybody is equal and shares responsibility, and there's some sort of equity in terms of wealth disbursement, income disbursement. That's not what exists on Native territories. That's somebody who's got some twisted idea what socialism is. But you know what? That's where racism comes in, where people can criticize what Native lives are, and the fact that the United States created a circumstance where some Native territories are completely dependent on federal funding, and because that dependency was created, and that's not socialism, that's dependency, that's different. Because that dependency was created, you're going to have a certain class of white people saying, "Oh, yeah, those guys shouldn't be getting anything. They all have casinos." No, they don't. No, we don't. But again, there's the entitlement that white people have. Will look at whether and then twist around what welfare really is, or what social services are, and make it sound like somebody's getting something that they deserve, and they're not getting enough. Take me to the Canadian side. On the Canadian side, many of the Native territories decided, you know what, we're going to close down our borders. And even though we have stores, the stores that are on the fringe they'll still service some of the Canadian public out there. But we're worried about, look, Native people were the first to be really critical and cynical and skeptical, I should say, about whether this was real or whether it was a hoax. And we have every reason to be suspicious. But once our people realized just how real this really was, many of our territories, especially on the Canadian side, said, you know what, we're putting checkpoints up. We just don't want people going through our territories. And it's funny because it's not even necessarily the same people, but all those people who railed against the blockades that were put on the railways and the highways and that kind of stuff, and were calling on trains to kill people and shoot at Indian Day and all that other stuff. Some of the same sentiment comes out just because we won't let white people come onto our territories, and it's not even just white people. These territories that closed themselves off said, we don't need to have that traffic coming through here. Look, I know it's bad for business, but we have to think at a different level here. We're concerned about our people. And I start seeing the posts on Facebook and on Twitter and other places. People are saying, then don't let them off the territory. If they won't let us go through the territory, then don't let them off. Or I want to go there. I want to buy gas. I'm gonna cough and sneeze all over the money that I give them. All of these really just stupid and just hateful things that the white folks in Canada are saying. Because the Native people are saying, no, we're going to do some closing off of our communities. So just the mere idea, not stopping trains and bridges. This is about just closing off outsiders from coming onto the territory. White people are having a fit about it. Why? Because the cheap cigarettes aren't available to them. So now they're looking at even their patronage to our stores as some entitlement that we are depriving them of. It's like this has no end. The funny thing is, you look at some of the comments that get made throughout this stuff. There was a post I saw that the governor of New Mexico had expressed concern that COVID-19 could wipe out entire populations of Native people. The Navajo, which covers a three-state area. The areas in New Mexico are getting the hardest hit, and hardest hit not only with the number of cases per the population, but the deadly cases. And so the governor of New Mexico was raising an issue, and of course the president, and it was raising this with the president of the United States, and of course he was oblivious to it, no idea. Oh yeah, well we're going to have to really look at that. What she was calling for, this governor was calling for, was for the Army Corps of Engineers to do what they've been doing in some other states, which is to build a hospital, because there's no really extensive health services provided on some of these more remote native territories, and the Navajo population in New Mexico is, again, they're in a relatively a medical desert, you might call it, without having some, especially with the with this virus affecting so many people. But so there are states, and the crazy part is they raise this issue now, but this idea of a medical desert or a food desert or any of these other things that exist on our territories, they existed before this. And now they're starting to realize, if we deprive these people of all these things and clean water and all that other stuff, that might not be a good situation if things ever go bad. It's not a good situation for us when they don't go bad. But this is the level of racism that exists in U.S. and state policy. I mean, jumping back to the gaming issue, just and we're about ready to take a break here, but to be clear, the Seneca Nation isn't the only one in this battle with state governments over the states trying to squeeze revenue sharing, like literally extort revenue sharing. When I say extort, what do you mean by extort? Well, here's what I mean. The position the states are taking: either you're going to share your revenue, or we're not going to continue with our gaming compact. And if you don't continue with your gaming compact, if you don't operate under a state gaming compact, we're going to see to it that you're shut down. Now, there's no proof that a state can actually do that. But lawyers for many of the native gaming enterprises are saying, yeah, but we don't know, because we don't know what the Trump administration and their Interior Department is going to do. Because one thing we do know is that the Trump administration's Interior Department and the Obama administration's Interior Department refused to address this revenue sharing provisions that have crept their way into these gaming compacts. And it's the Interior Department who needs to do their job and refuses. And now the concern is, if this Interior Department under Donald Trump addresses this issue, they may totally screw Native people. Like, we're going to take a break. When we come back, I want to touch just once again on the Mashpee issue, because that's another example of just overt racism being demonstrated against Native people. So we'll talk about that when we come back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. Thanks for coming back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. Hey, I want to thank my sponsors because without them, especially now, it would be very difficult to keep going. And I want to give my hats off to Jake for still making it in. We are 6 feet apart, but still, we're the idea that we're not sheltering in place. But let me thank my sponsors. I want to thank Ross and Holly John and the RJE family of businesses. I want to thank Eric White and ERW Enterprises, Grand River Enterprises, and NWS, and Cat Res Gas and Smoke Shops. I want to thank them for stepping up. If we didn't have this kind of support, even though I'm not going to New York, I'm still doing my New York show. We pay for services that allow us to do these kinds of things. And if I didn't have that kind of support, it would be very, very difficult for me to continue to do this. So I appreciate it. I also appreciate the support that I get from you, the listeners, who share the shows. My wife, who shares it on a whole bunch of Facebook group pages. But those of you who share the podcasts and the videos and that kind of stuff. And I know we should have used this time to produce more videos, and we're going to work on one this week. So you can look for that. But we're still busy doing not only this show on Tuesdays and Saturday nights, but also the show that I do for New York. We're doing here at this studio, so it's a little bit more work here. So I want to thank all of you who help us and grow out the listenership. All right, I wanted to talk about the Mashpee thing again. I kind of got into it last show, but sometimes the explanation is so complicated, and I want to make it simple. The Mashpee Wampanoag are they're their own way. They are original people. They are real people with a real tie to a homeland. For whatever reason, however the United States manages to do this, took them off of their register, I guess, of recognized tribes. They went through a process of what they call federal acknowledgement. And the problem with this federal acknowledgement or federal recognition is that the federal government has twisted the definition of what a native person is. And they did this in 1934 in particular. And that's when they redefined what a native person was, which is really difficult because when it's the federal government that gets to decide that and define that, it leaves us as the actual native people in a very awkward position. Because we either reject their definition, and then we are not that, or we have to somehow assert our own definition that, that still creates a big question mark. So their definition of a native person is a tribe, band, or nation of Indians subordinate to the laws of the United States. So the Mashpee, which there's no question that they are an original people. But in going through this process to assert their identity, which ends up being lumped into this federal acknowledgement process, the federal government recognizes them. And so the Mashpee said, okay, you recognize that what is obvious. And they began the process of reacquiring lost lands. And part of it is they wanted to build, no question about it, they wanted to build gaming. And why? Because gaming ends up being, like with many other territories, including Seneca Nation here, it ends up being a good means for public finance. I mean, because we don't tax our people. We don't use the same systems that municipalities use. And we don't like the dependency that I spoke of earlier that many people are forced to have on the federal government, Canadian government or the U.S. federal government, either one. So the Mashpee wanted to build gaming. So they started acquiring land. And under the Obama administration, they used a process that is called fee to trust. That means you buy the property with a fee title or a title that is a state deed. And then you use a federal process. And there's really only one broad-based federal process for reclamation of ancestral lands, and that's called the fee to trust. So you take that land that you bought in fee, and then you essentially have the federal government hold it in trust for you. I mean, it's still your land, but the federal government holds the title, and they reclassify the title as not as fee title anymore, but as trust lands that are for the use and enjoyment of native people, of the native people they're holding it for. So, and that by that act, the federal government considers it "quote unquote" Indian country. Once it's been placed into trust in the name of one of these tribes, it becomes Indian country, and then it qualifies for to do things that have some semblance of sovereignty associated with, like gaming, like tax-free sales and other things that the federal government or the state government might not have oversight on. State government anyway. Except for gaming, where the state government does have some oversight, but that's a whole other issue. So under the Obama administration, they're 230 acres, or maybe it was 300 acres, and people can correct me, but the point is, several hundred acres were designated and put into trust for the Mashpee Wampanoag. Then there were some people at the state level and probably gaming interests that tried to raise a question. Said, "Wait, we think there's a problem with that fee to trust application." And even though it was already granted, they challenged it. And one of the things they challenged it was again that 1934 rule. I talked about this before, but let me just brush by it real quick. There's a rule, and they call it the 1934 rule. And what that rule says that if you are a federally recognized tribe, but you can't prove that you were under U.S. jurisdiction as a tribe in 1934, you can't reacquire land. You can't have land you can't utilize the fee to trust process. Now, it's bizarre that there's so much doublespeak in everything from, again, the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924, and the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934, which is where the 1934 rule comes from. Well, you think with all of that these laws that the United States passed that tried to express that who was and wasn't citizens of the United States, in spite of what we think, this stuff should have been covered. So the Trump administration just last week, in the midst of this pandemic, decided this is as good a time as any to express the racism of this administration. And they told the Mashpee that they need to de-establish the land that they've acquired as native lands. I didn't even know de-establish is even a word, but that's what they were told. They said, no, we gotta turn the clock back. So even though it was your land, and then it was lost through who knows what, fraud, theft, whatever, swindling of some sort, and you reacquired it, it didn't push people off of the land claims. You reacquired that land, put it all together, and then got federal designation that it was now quote unquote Indian country. No, we're not going to let that happen. We're going to strip that away. So now the Mashpee have a bunch of land that the federal government says, no, it's not in trust. It's just state land. You're just like white people owning land. You got to pay taxes on it. And you know that whole casino thing? Forget it. You can't do it. You can't do it. We're not going to let you. Now, there was no reason that this administration had to make that determination. And in fact, there are any number of ways that Congress, or the Interior Department could have dealt with this issue. I mean, the Senecas, for instance, and I mentioned this on the last show, the Senecas have a very special carve out in a lease settlement that was determined by an act of Congress, the Salamanca Lease Settlement Act, where the Senecas could reacquire land, not to put it into trust, but reacquire it as absolute title, as Seneca land, not as New York State deeded land, not as a U.S. deed or a state deed, but as Seneca land. So they can do it, but they ain't doing it for the Mashpee, and this administration isn't going to let it happen. So, I bring this up because, again, you would think if there was ever a time that you're gonna let's play nice. We're all in a hell of a thing here. This is, again, once in a century, once in a lifetime. People are going to look back. The kids that we have now, the little kids that we have, our grandchildren, in my case, or your children, for those of you listening, you're going to talk about this for decades. And when they're adults, they're going to look back and they say, yeah, I was a little kid when that COVID-19 came through and, killed 100,000 people. Yeah, that's what people are going to talk about. But even as they're talking about that, you say, but you know what? The racism of Donald Trump's administration seemed to, persevere. The racism of U.S. and Canadian citizens seemed to stay right intact when it came to Native people. The bias and the privilege that white people have that enabled them to criticize anything that Native people did that was somehow distinct from what they did, that seemed to survive. That's what I find just amazing in this time. The show that I did in New York last week, I talked about racism in medicine. And I wasn't even talking about necessarily COVID-19, but there's been a number of stories that various news media, including NPR and some of the main news networks have covered. And in fact, even a couple of the shows on television, the doctor shows, they've addressed this issue, which is that women of color, black people in particular, but women of color in general, have a mortality rate in childbirth that is 4 times that of white people. Now, is it because women of color can't give birth? No, that's not the case. And are they less healthy? No, that's not even the case. It's the treatment at the hands of hospitals that are run by white people. Now, I'm not saying that everybody in a hospital is white, but the decision makers And you know what? Even people of color who work in a hospital have a tendency to do like black cops do and perceive people of color differently than white people. So if a woman of color, if a black woman says that she's having pain, or that she needs something, a staff or administrator or a staff person might dismiss it. Much more likely to dismiss it when a black woman or a woman of color complains about a pain or whatever than if a white woman does. Nobody wants to see a poor white woman in pain. But you know what? Black people, women of color, they can sort of suck it up. And that's why a black woman or a woman of color is 4 times more likely to die in childbirth than a white woman. And to be clear, infant mortality and maternal mortality associated with childbirth, for a first world country like the United States, the numbers ain't great, folks. And most of the reason the numbers ain't great is because the people of color bring that number down. We don't do it, but the way we're treated in these hospitals. So if that's the way a woman is treated doing something as sacred and precious as giving birth, what can we expect when a person of color goes into a hospital complaining of shortness of breath? I mean, how many people of color, when they go in to a hospital, are immediately assumed to be either have no insurance or be impoverished or being homeless or something like that? I know how it goes. I mean, I just know how it goes. When my first child was born, I was living in Houston, Texas, and my wife's water broke 7 weeks early. And the assumption was, because of the color of our skin, that we were Mexicans. And the staff people at the hospital immediately tried to speak to us in Spanish. Now, I'm not saying speaking to Spanish is racist, but the assumption that they made already was that, it's some of those people again. And again, it can be subtle. It can be subtle. But when some of these subtle distinctions are rear their head in terms of treatment, that's when all of a sudden you start seeing what the numbers look like. Why a Native person or a person of color or a black woman has a 4 times more likely chances of dying in a hospital, even doing something as, pure and sacred as giving birth. So when something like this happens, this pandemic, the stories haven't really even started to roll in, but they're going to. And if we couldn't avoid racism in something like childbirth, when in a situation where there isn't necessarily some underlying social disorder thing happening that that causes staff administrators or staff to be under stress, but when you put them under stress like now, man, it scares me. It scares me to think about how people of color are going to be treated, considering this pandemic. And especially since, like I said, on social media, we're already seeing the racist comments come our way. There was, I mentioned the other day, there was a guy on Seneca Land where the thruway crosses who wielded a shotgun or something like that. The cops stopped him. He beat 2 police officers, I guess. The construction crews that were there doing the road construction assisted the officers. Anyway, they arrested him. The guy was from Niagara Falls. And he had bombs on him. And he had bombs and guns in his home. But you know what? Some of the first comments that hit Facebook, because the guy was in that area that crosses the territory, it must have been those goddamn Indians. The comments started coming through first thing. First damn thing. I'll admit that when I first heard the story, I'm thinking, he must have been a white supremacist. And shame on me for jumping to that conclusion. I don't, to this day, I don't know. Nobody's really put together a motive on the whole thing, why this guy had all these bombs in his home and why this guy was even acting out on the thruway. And again, most people, when you're on the thruway, you become oblivious. It wasn't the fact that the thruway was so tore up where it went through Seneca territory because the state refused to fix it. You might not even know when you're on Seneca territory when you're on the thruway. I mean, look, we're just kind of we're like a flyover state, right? We're like a flyover territory. You fly down the thruway, you barely even notice. You see a few billboards, but there's nothing to distinguish that you're on Seneca territory. So when this guy acted up, I don't know, it had anything to do with the fact that he was on, other than it being in a construction zone. But some of the immediate comments that were out there were just loaded with this underlying racism. And it's not even, we hear about it all the time when especially during this administration and even the last administration, because of a president who was a person of color. The racism started really coming out. And once Trump got elected, now we assume that there's been such a normalization of racism that we just expect it. I mean, it's amazing to me that we just have to accept that that's the way it is. And if you resist it in any way, and even if that resistance has really noble reasons, like you want to protect your water or your land or your distinction in any way, it immediately gets met with this overt racist language. I mean, I said this before, and it's not even just on the Canadian side, on the U.S. side. Look, when we were battling the mascot issue, some of the hateful things that were all over all the social media, all of the forums associated with the newspapers, it was just incredible. And when the I Don't Know More movement was kicking up, I think it was the Winnipeg Free Press, the newspaper in Winnipeg, they actually had to shut down their forum, associated with their newspaper. They said it was just too hateful. They tried to moderate it and they said they were just overrun. They finally just shut off all comments. You could no longer comment on the Winnipeg Free Press website. They had even considered shutting down the whole website, but they just eliminated all of the whole comment section because of the overt racism. And look, we've experienced it here on the U.S. side, especially the Buffalo News, and not just the Buffalo News. Some of the Niagara Falls newspapers. Oh, no, we've got it from every place. And of course, the state jumps in. It isn't just the press that does it. It's the people and it's their elected officials that do it. I mean, we've heard racist comments come out of guys like Andrew Cuomo. I know everybody thinks Andrew Cuomo is the second coming of Christ or something like that, because he doesn't sound like a babbling idiot like the president of the United States. Oh, Cuomo for president. Well, be careful what you wish for. From a native standpoint, we've heard the racist comments come out of Andrew Cuomo, and everybody's trying to say that he's showing such gallant leadership in the face of this COVID-19 crisis. Let's be clear. The United States is not handling this very well. New York State was too slow to react. The United States was too slow to react. And Cuomo and Trump can brag all they want about how quick they were to respond, but they weren't. They didn't. And New York is paying the price for it. The United States is paying the price for it. And of course, all the U.S. citizens who wanted to play, oh, this is a hoax. I don't believe this. I don't believe this. You want to deny, whatever a scientist has to say because you're so locked into this, conspiracy theory mentality that if somebody tells you something is wrong for you, then you got to say, oh, yeah, see, here we go. This is them trying to declare martial law. Well, the solution to that from a native standpoint is take more control of your own territories. And I don't mean, build border walls, but just be less reliant on what comes from the state. Be less reliant on what comes from the federal government. And I'm not just saying that because of now. Anybody who listens to the show knows that I always talk about this stuff. This is exactly what I'm talking about. And like I said, shame on me for all of those times on this show that I've talked about the bottom dropping out of the United States, their economic system, the debt that drives state, federal, and global economies, that collapse, the collapse of the fossil fuels based economy, the collapse of social order because of nationalism and racism, the collapse of the political system because of corruption in the system that has a guy elected as the president of the United States with 2 million less votes than the person that they managed to defeat. The DNCs, rigging their primaries last time and this time too. Whatever's happening with foreign interference. I mean, the political system is a mess. The justice system is a mess. And of course, there's climate change and there's global conflict. But I never even entertained a 100-year pandemic. I don't even know why I never thought about it. I mean, there are other people have made this prediction, but I never gave it the kind of weight that I should have. Shame on me for being, oblivious to it. I mean, I get so caught up in how man has screwed up the things that they've created. I never even thought of the fact that nature rears its head in such a way. I mean, a pandemic is not unlike climate change. It's nature's response. And, that's what we're seeing here, folks. And look, I wish I guess it wouldn't matter if I called it or not. It wasn't going to change anything. But this has the potential to really get ugly. Like I said, we're probably 3, 4, maybe even 5 weeks away. I mean, I know the governor and the president are trying to say it's a week away or 2 weeks away from its apex in terms of, the death toll and the spread and everything else. Not even close. Not even close. Like I said, a country of 330 million people, and only about 1 million have been tested, and the infection rate's pretty high, and the mortality rate's pretty high, and it's pretty high already without a run on the hospitals. So when this thing starts to get real bad, look, we're already feeling some of the racism today. How bad does it get when things start to really unravel? Look, there's people who've been home for 2 weeks. I expect there's probably been some domestic turmoil caused by it. People probably getting sick of being too close to their loved ones in some cases. Parents who never had to give this much attention to their kids for the first time and realizing how annoying it is to be with their kids all day long. Kids feeling the same way about their parents. No, some of this stuff has got to be tough. I mean, and it's great for all of you who are really enjoying this time. Man, I'm happy for you. I mean, I don't feel terrible about the time that I'm spending at home. I mean, I come from home to a studio where it's just Jake and I. I don't, look, this isn't that much of a change to my lifestyle. But some people are struggling with this. And when this gets real bad in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks, I don't know what's going to happen to the social unrest. I mean, it was pointed out to me a number of times that the crime rate's probably down right now. And then what happens? So when the crime rate, when people really start to unravel stuff and you start seeing stores being looted, I mean, it was getting pretty tense in a lot of these stores when people were wiping out all the products on the shelves. And there was some tension. People were fighting. There were, stores that were having a hell of a time managing some of the people who were losing their mind because they couldn't buy all the toilet paper they wanted. But it's probably going to get much worse before it gets much better. So what happens with the social unrest and the underlying tensions that exist because of racism concern me, because that's where it can get the ugliest first. Maybe not last, but first. And I'm not even talking about the longer term economic consequences of all this stuff. And when people start getting hurt financially. But this, man, I just hope people can keep it together. And because we got a ways to go yet, folks. We got a ways to go yet. Look, we're going to keep doing what we do here. I will do my Thursday New York show, which is on WBAI, and that's from 3 to 5 p.m. It's a 2-hour show on Thursday. I will stream it live on my Facebook group pages. We'll be doing it here in my studio once again. And of course, we'll be airing on WBAI. You can ask Alexa to play WBAI on Thursday at 3 o'clock. And you can listen to it on your smart speaker. You can go on your computer and pull up WBAI.org, or if you're on Facebook, you can catch us as we stream video of the show. And we'll do what we do in that New York show, which is talk about the issues, probably do a bit more of a COVID-19 update, as well as take calls for hour two from all over. And I would love to get callers from home, from native territories, calling into my New York show. So tune us in and catch us on online or on Facebook, and make the call into our show in New York. Look forward to that. And of course, then we'll be back here on Saturday. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. Thanks for listening. We'll see you in a few days. Yahweh.